Our social identity, where we begin to fathom the structure of our global conscious system between the spiritual to physical and the collective's experience. Our personal identity gave us the window to see the operation of consciousness in full, and the knowledge we gained through building our awareness ignited our human intelligence to move us from survival mode into transcendental consciousness. So growth within our transcendental state is asking the question of how a childhood trauma can exist and discovering the platform that contributes to facilitating its creation. So transcendental consciousness is where we process the social construct and its many limiting stereotypes to understand the purpose of its use, while seeing how we contributed and have been affected by its existence. It's the road to evolving from this point onwards that needs us to delve deeply into our global beliefs, so we can hold ourselves accountable for how we've contributed to this system of inequality, as it's the concept of money that makes inequality acceptable under the idea of trade. So if we're going to get back to a place where we can work together and share, we are going to need to see the reality of these identities as an individual, group, timeline, and location, so we can see how they work as a system when it relates to labour, trade, profit, and power. It's utilising the wheel of privilege that allows us to process our identities, not through focusing on the groups that hold the most power, but by looking through the one that created our childhood trauma, as it's processing the mistreatment we felt that allows us to relate to those who have been affected by the identities we hold our most power within. So when we heal through the pain of our trauma identity and take that processed pain to look at the groups that are affected by our most powerful ones, we are able to bring both viewpoints together to compare the experiences. And it's seeing the indifferences taking place within both that allows us to see how stereotypes benefit and are used by the system to manipulate the movements of all groups, and how we have bought into those stereotypes for our own gain. When we believed the stereotype of a group, so we could choose ignorance and deflection to avoid acknowledging a truth about our powerful identity, or when we believed the stereotype of another, so we could choose victimization and blame to avoid hearing the truth about our least powerful one. But the reality is, what both identities need is empathy and understanding, as it's acknowledging the truth of both that will open our eyes to the reality of our world, and the reality for those who don't have a powerful identity to speak or be humanized through. So asking ourselves the right questions and viewing that question through the group of our childhood trauma is how we gain our own understanding of self, to see the reality for others and our world. But let's remember, our journey has a process of 4 parts. So whilst explaining the impacts of our global beliefs will help you with your growth, it's knowing how to manage consciousness for ourselves that will ensure we receive the insight I'm explaining. So let's refocus. It's the in-depth processing made at our personal identity that gives us the tools to navigate higher levels of consciousness. As we move through our growth, each new level attained will need us to utilize our human intelligence to introspect on our previous timeline, so we can discover the actual process to evolving. We introspect our previous timeline and we utilize that knowledge to lay the pathway for our current level. This is how we gain the visibility to foresee the stepping stones of consciousness. And once we know how to create this visibility within our first level of growth, we create it for all levels of consciousness, giving us the awareness and conscious positioning to see the road to our journey, whilst showing us the foresight we can create when we continue to introspect on our growth whilst growing. So now we know introspecting our growth as we grow is how we gain the foresight that keeps our path steady. Then we can also acknowledge that one aspect of getting us to reach full spectrum consciousness has already been achieved. You see, it's spotting the cues of consciousness in real time that offers opportunities for spiritual growth to be made. And due to the depth of introspection we made on our previous timelines, our conscious mind and human intelligence are already trained to spot and interpret these cues. This is where we see the benefits of introspecting our trauma and personal identity timelines, as the awareness we gained is why we are now able to see God's presence in full and the movements of consciousness. So with our conscious awareness already equipped to manage our growth in real time, our focus can remain on what part of our physical reality needs to be understood to evolve viewpoints. What global beliefs of ourselves and our world need to be released. What realizations about both need to be gained. What physical changes we need to make to align to our human value, and what new skills and opportunities we need to recognize to stimulate our spiritual growth. It's understanding the viewpoints you'll need to achieve that will make reaching full spectrum consciousness easier to obtain. You see, everything I've explained up until this point has prepared your conscious awareness to see and feel consciousness in real time. So as long as the steps I've explained are adopted, you'll have the spiritual discernment to effectively navigate the rest of your journey, as it's relying on ourselves to reach full spectrum consciousness that allows us to see and witness the value of God's presence and system, whilst teaching ourselves that we never needed to follow the orders of one another, as it's God's system that has always been our structure for law and order. So this is why my purpose is to example, explain, and prove this system, as it's listening to God through your human intelligence that will direct your actions to make your individual freedom a reality. So now the prep work to reach transcendental consciousness has been achieved. Let's look at the viewpoints you'll need to face to reach full spectrum consciousness. So what we learn from our personal identity is that there are 4 viewpoints we need to achieve before we can ignite our human intelligence to move into transcendental consciousness. Now, The easiest way to understand a viewpoint when it relates to conscious growth is to firstly see that within the process of reaching that new viewpoint, there is an expansion of our conscious awareness taking place, where the walls of what holds our current understanding is being stretched to retain more information. So each viewpoint shows us the capacity of information we can analyze, sense, and visualize within a moment, and the capacities of what each viewpoint can hold is within the description of what each one is. Our individual viewpoint can hold and process the capacity of our own consciousness. Our group viewpoint can hold and process the capacity of ourselves and the individual consciousness of others. Our state viewpoint can hold and process ourselves, individuals, and the combined consciousness within that group. And our system viewpoint can process ourselves, individuals, and the group consciousness, while seeing the system that contributes to the thought processes taking place. So when we take these viewpoints and apply them to each level of consciousness, it's clear that for us to process through the levels, we need to see the system of each global belief before we can evolve. And from the viewpoint of what we enter each new level of consciousness with. So seeing the system within each global belief is how we progress on to the next level. And seeing the system of our global reality from all perspectives is how we are ready to fulfill our purpose, as it's accounting for every human experience that will make our soul assignment visible. So trying to create solutions whilst holding on to these beliefs will only perpetuate its existence because of how we are exchanging within it, whilst producing a solution for our world that is less intentional than our purpose. We can't rely on the system's mechanism of control if we know every exchange is steeped in inequality. This is why releasing the concept of money is the most physically sacrificial, as we need to sacrifice our idea of stability for equality. And that process of sacrifice will be showing us where we need to change our relationship to what gives us our current physical stability, and how we'll need to release that stability for the vision and truth we are seeing. But remember, we already know the benefits of aligning to the truth of consciousness. So releasing the concept of money is only the last cord we cut to be free to work with God's system and currency. So choosing equality is what we all need to do, and proactively contributing to the change our world needs starts within full spectrum consciousness. This is Reaching Full Spectrum Consciousness with Vanessa Nash.